It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Tuesday, October 29th, 2024, and you know what that means. It's almost time for some trick-or-treating, but also, it's time to get nerdy, y'all. Welcome to episode number 322 of Two Nerds in a Pod, nerdiest video game podcast in the galaxy. I am Lob, also known as Mr. Nice Guy, and I'm joined by my comrade in gaming commentary, who also edits our show and will probably not edit out that cough because that was real. The Miggity Mac, also known as Maction. Mac, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing well, but I'll only not edit it out if we don't have a second take. You got some water?
I got some water, and I'm going to take a drink right now. And while I'm doing that, want to hear about how you've been and what's new on your end.
Oh, man. Well, this last weekend was fantastic. Of course, it's been a couple weeks since we did the show. We couldn't get together last week. I think the coolest thing has been that we started up our D&D 101 class again. So
nice.
At our local library, my spouse and I, we are teaching Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to the children of the town, or at least those who, you know, were able to spare some time on a Saturday. And so this last Saturday was session numero uno, and it was an absolute blast. It's always a blast when we do this, but it's especially a blast to watch like some kids be like, yeah, okay, we'll try something out, and then at the end be like, oh my gosh, I can't wait until next week. Oh, this is so cool. What'll happen next time? So it's, watching somebody turn around on the dime there is real fun.
That's the thing about D&D, because on paper it sounds like someone's telling you a bedtime story. You know, and I'm kind of like, my parents were the best at that, and also, I am not 5. But then you play, and you're like, oh, this is what this is. This is very cool. And especially if you're a nerd and you're into video games and comics and just that nerd culture.
Yeah.
Especially if you're into, like, dark magic settings, then you get into it pretty quickly.
But that's the coolest thing from my week. Mr. Nice Guy, how about yours?
Oh, what was the coolest thing from the week? So, played some more laser tag, tactical laser tag with the boys.
Nice.
I've been
Headshots only?
doing that. Headshots only. Did that on Friday night. Saturday, lots of sports. Sunday, lots of relaxation, man. So nothing too super interesting. I did do one thing new today that I wanted to share with the people and share with you live. So throughout the years, I've had various social media content creation attempts with varying levels of success. Not the least of which, actually probably one of the most successful, is this podcast that we've been doing for several years. But I started a new thing today. I started a TikTok and posted a video today, planning on posting pretty regularly, about to link it in the chat for those who are curious. Posted a video about Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and how Call of Duty means a lot to me. I don't know if that link came through.
It did come through. I can see it.
And first video that I posted is up to like 800 views in like a few hours, in like half a day. So that was very, very encouraging. So, you know, those years of making trolling videos back in the day and commentating under a different name when I used to do those videos, and then podcasting with you, doing stand-up, trying a lot of different things, paying some dividends, Mac. So for the listeners, check out the TikTok, and the link is in the chat.
Very cool. I'll make sure that gets in some way or another linked to the episode, as I do think it is super relevant. But that's really cool.
Yeah, you're always like, will this get 2 views? And it got 800 as of now. So we'll see how much it has when I go to bed. But Mac, enough about that. I say we do what we do best, and we hop right up in that gaming news, my friend. What do you think about that?
Let's do it. Mr. Nice Guy, what is new in video gaming?
So much is new. And once again, this is episode 322 of Two Nerds in a Pod. Happy Halloween to all who celebrate. And I hope you all get a lot of good candy on Thursday, and let your parents inspect it before you eat it. Well, Mac, first news story comes from GameSpot.com, written by Blair Marnell. Now, we don't really talk about politics on the show, but this is, well, I guess we do in some ways because we talk about legalese, but this is gaming adjacent politics, and here is what he wrote. As of today, there are 7 days left in the campaign for the U.S. presidential election. Now the Democratic ticket, headlined by Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, is courting the gamer vote by launching their own map on Fortnite. Fortnite players can access the Harris-Walz map by entering code, and then it has the code here. The name of the map is Freedom Town, USA, and it may be the most pointed political use of Fortnite since it launched in 2015. Harris's team also posted a quick trailer for Freedom Town, including a look at some of the fighters in patriotic gear. Mac, this is not the first time that presidential candidates have attempted to win over a vote by doing something quote-unquote cool, something out of their normal area of expertise. I saw something about Tim Walz was going to stream on Twitch the other day. What do you think about this attempt to win the vote? Would it sway you if you were undecided? And I don't know what your decision is, but is this the type of thing that could influence your vote?
Not really. I don't think just the presence of a politician on a popular forum or video game could really sway my vote personally. Now, what could absolutely do it is if I were undecided, and we had, say, somebody who was like, video games are art, and they deserve to be preserved, and publishers shouldn't be able to cut you off just because the company goes under or because of whatever. We're going to fix the intellectual property system in this country so that you can't get cut off. And while we're at it, for good measure, we'll make it so that farmers can't get screwed over by John Deere and repairing their tractors while we're at it. You know what? Let's just fix all this right to repair nonsense problems that we've got going on. That would work like gangbusters for me. And us as video gamers, obviously, we should be hand in hand with the John Deere people. Video gamers, farmers. We are more alike than we are dissimilar when it comes to what we love. But I would say that that's probably the thing that I think would be more in my wheelhouse. But I acknowledge that I'm weird.
No, so I mean, basically what you're saying is what most people would say, which is it's about the policies rather than the politics. But here's my thought on why they may be doing this. I don't know if they are doing it to try to sway people's vote. I think that they're probably doing it to try to reach a broader audience. Not that gamers are apathetic. Obviously, I am a gamer, and I'm involved in the civil system in terms of the fact that I vote and I follow it.
Same.
But I think that there may be some within any demographic who are apathetic. And so by going on to a platform like Fortnite, which is big, broad, and has a wide, diverse group of people who play, if there is someone who's more apathetic about politics, they see your name and maybe they start to research your policies.
So what you're telling me, Lam, is that you and I are not the target audience for this foray into Fortnite Freedom Town.
I don't think so. Especially since I play Fortnite very, very casually. It's not my jam.
Especially me, who plays Fortnite not at all.
I mean, I like the game. I'll play it with my kids, but if I'm sitting down to play something, that's not in the top 10 or 20 games. So shout out to them, though, for going after the vote. I mean, it's not the first time politicians have done this. I remember hearing about Bill Clinton going on MTV and playing a saxophone. AOC has streamed on Twitch. So, I mean, a lot of people in office do this. This is dope. I like it. And I like not talking about politics on my podcast as well. So let's move on. Next story, Mac, is on Kotaku.com by Ethan Gach. Here is what Ethan writes. Firewalk Studios is shutting down. PlayStation co-CEO Herman Hulst announced in a press release on Tuesday. The team was responsible for Concord, the company's sci-fi hero shooter that bombed so badly it was taken offline just weeks after its launch earlier this year. The news came less than 2 years after the PlayStation 5 maker first acquired Firewalk Studios as part of its ambitious plan for live service gaming. I'm not going to get into the quotes about Concord. We've discussed it previously on the podcast. Curious for your perspective, Mac. I have some strong opinions on this. The time frame of purchasing something and then shutting it down within 2 years based on, from what we can see, the failure of one game that had a massive budget not doing well initially. Thoughts on that time frame in terms of the studio being shut down?
Well, not to retread ground, but I mean, I think the observation that I think it was you who made it with what's it called? It's Cyberpunk 2077.
Right.
Did not do especially well on launch, but had time to get better. And I know you brought up a couple different ones that like
No Man's Sky.
Yeah, No Man's Sky. Yeah,
a few others.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously I very much side with you then as well as now that it's like, yeah, maybe if it doesn't launch so great, maybe you give it some time, listen to what the community is saying, make some changes. That goes a long way to helping to develop a community which is absolutely essential to the not only initial but continued success of a game like Concord. So yeah, it seems like they didn't even give it much of a chance out of the gate, which is a shame.
It is. And so here's my thing where I first of all, I agree with you because you said
no.
things to what I have.
I was going to say, no. You're agreeing with me, agreeing with you.
Right, exactly. So I partially agree with you. So I guess I partially agree with myself. Because the thing that I don't agree with you on is I don't agree with them shutting down the studio that quickly. And it's not just because of a sunken costs thing. Like, it's been 2 years. Game wasn't profitable. You had put a lot of money into it. Fine, shut the game down. I would imagine that when you're purchasing a studio that you're looking at a lot of things. You're looking at things like balance sheet. You're looking at things like projects that are in development. You're looking at, just a lot of things. But I would imagine that one of the things you're looking at is the talent that the studio has employed there. And so to shut the studio down effectively means that you're losing all that talent that you believed in. And I don't believe that in game development that 2 years is a long enough time to give up on the talent. So the way that I would have handled this as a guy armchair quarterbacking and giving advice, right? Yeah, I would have rebranded. I would have kept everything as it was and maybe given the studio a new name or moved the people who work there to other positions similar to what they were doing under the PlayStation umbrella. Because in this scenario that we're living in this timeline, they're giving up and these people are losing their jobs. I get it, harsh world, that happens. But you're also giving up on the talent that you believed in 2 years ago. And the talent that hasn't done anything to disprove the reasons that you purchased the studio. Simply bad game sales that have a lot of factors are the reasons that game didn't do well. So, I don't know. I would have handled it differently. I think a rebrand was in order.
And I 100% agree with Lom right now, right here. Yeah, shouldn't have shut down the studio. That's ridiculous. Where are those people going? You're not keeping them in the company, and you're not going to be able to, make something of their talents in the future.
It's weird. And, sometimes you write stuff off. In the stock game, you buy a stock, you hold it for a year. If it's down, you can sell it at a loss and write that off on your taxes. I don't know how it works in game development in terms of these types of losses. I assume that it's just lost, right? And you can't get any type of benefit from it. But this is not how I would have handled this. And shout out to all of them who are unfortunately losing jobs as far as we can see. Mac, one more news story. And this is one that's just near and dear to my heart. So I want the people to be aware. Monster Hunter Wilds beta is live. This is by Darren Bontheus on GameSpot.com. Preloading will be available for everyone taking part in the Monster Hunter Wilds beta, but PlayStation Plus members who will get early access to the beta can begin downloading it now. However, doing so isn't especially straightforward. If you're on PlayStation 5 and looking to preload the beta, you'll need to find it hidden within the list of versions of Wilds that are available. Here's how to find it. And then it has a list of instructions of how you can find the beta.
How many steps in this instructions? Is it numbered? Is it like 20 steps?
It's not numbered, but there are 4 bullet points.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that there's a lot of back and forth we can have here. I feel like betas should be easy to access. And I don't understand the either lack of self-awareness or the overconfidence that's happening here where you think, hey, it's Monster Hunter. They know who we are. If they want to play us, they'll find us. Huge Monster Hunter fan here. And excited to jump into the beta, but come on. The great thing about Monster Hunter is that there's a sense of community that exists there, and the opportunity for new players to jump into Monster Hunter is big. Make the beta more easily accessible so that it can continue to be as successful as it is. Last thing, Mac, and then if you have stuff to add, I'd love to hear it. Monster Hunter was not always such an Americanized thing. It was very much more overseas in Japan. And so I'm really, really happy that it's come as far as it has and that it's built the audience that it has. Let's do things to continue that and to make it easily accessible, even in beta form. That's it.
No, I have nothing to add. But that was perfect. Yeah, make things more accessible. 100%.
Yeah, and that has been News for the Week. Welcome, all our live viewers. How are y'all?
Welcome, welcome. It's time now to turn to a little bit of video game history. Something that's happened this week, these past couple of weeks, in years that came before, big moments in gaming, if you will. And Mr. Nice Guy, I have one that I'm going to come back to in a few minutes, but I'm going to ask you to think about it. A favorite game for Android.
Okay.
All right. We'll keep on moving. Some fantastic games released in these last couple of weeks. In 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Final Fantasy VI, or Final Fantasy III as we called it over here in the States, because it wasn't until much later that we got 2 and 5. Absolutely fantastic Final Fantasy VI. And I think the thing that really blew me away most about the game wasn't so much the, cast of characters or even necessarily the story. It was the opera scene in the game. Nice Guy, did you ever play Final Fantasy VI?
I have not, man. Final Fantasy is one of those franchises. Never got into it. Need to get into it. Need to find a good starting point.
6 is a real good place to get started. And they've got things like the Pixel remaster and such that are going on, but Final Fantasy VI had this scene in it where essentially it was kind of like a bit like Phantom of the Opera sort of thing going on, where you had a monster that was ruining a opera that was going on, and essentially what it came out mechanically as it was basically a kind of memory game for you as the player to remember like what the lines were as one of your characters takes the position of one of the actors in it, and you have to try and keep the scene going. But there's this lovely, in the best of the Super Nintendo's rendering, orchestral score, or pseudo-orchestral score. It was beautiful, it plucked at the heartstrings, it was just great, and at the end, you got cash. People threw money, or Gil in this case, people threw money at you as an encore if you did well in the thing. So, kind of just this really fun in-universe way to basically do a memory test that was really fun. But yeah, love Final Fantasy VI. Can't say enough good things about it. If they were going to do a remake of a game a la the Final Fantasy VII remake, I'd love to see them do FF6.
Right.
Never gonna happen, but I'd love to see them. Another one in 1998, released for the PlayStation 1, Metal Gear Solid. A fantastic game, pulled Metal Gear out of the 2D and really into the third dimension with a bunch of interesting mechanics, a bunch of interesting things. I think my favorite part of it was the fight against Psycho Mantis in that game, where the computer would read your controller. Now, like, not in the normal way, that like, oh, the computer in the game knows where you are, and so it's like reacting to the things that you do, but like, you would try to move and it will already be countering you in the cheapest way possible because the enemy is reading your mind in the game universe. And so the way to really counteract that, and I forget how you knew this, I actually had a strategy guide.
Cheater,
yeah. But the way that you overcame that easily was by pausing the game, unplugging your controller from the player 1 controller port, and plugging it into the player 2 port, and then using that to fight him with. And the player 2 port would work just fine, and he couldn't read the player 2 thing, and it was very, very interesting. There were a lot of interesting things that they did just to kind of mess with you in that game, But that was definitely one that was particularly memorable.
Mac, when you have a chance, I want you to look up a game called Animal Well.
Animal Well. Okay.
Yep.
I swear it will be done.
Because it has some similarities to what you're talking about.
Oh, okay. Cool. And similarly for you, Doki Doki Literature Club.
Okay, sounds like it'd be right up my alley.
Then we'll just pop back, Mr. Nice Guy. I asked you about Android because it was 2008 this last week that the Android operating system got released, and mobile gaming kind of really got its feet underneath it. Nice Guy, favorite mobile game?
That's tough. So when we're talking mobile, we're not talking just like because it's on the Steam Deck, it's mobile. We're talking about like a legitimate game that could be played on.
Yep, like a phone game.
Yeah, so
we're going
here's the
back
thing.
to the late aughts.
Okay, well, I mean, this is tough, man, because there's so many games that now are Android games that started out on Steam or started elsewhere. And so the one I was going to say is Vampire Survivors, because it is available on Steam, but it's also an Android game. But
true.
if we're trying to go back to like late 2000s, this is super tough, man. I'd have to think longer.
Okay. Copy that.
What's yours?
I would have difficulty choosing between Angry Birds and Cut the Rope. Had a real good time on both of those.
Oh, geez. Cut the Rope was Android?
It at least was back in the day, yeah.
Well, see, I played it on iPhone. So here's the one that I'll go with. And I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called Gunbound. And it is definitely a phone game. It's one of those games where you're like on a map and you're shooting at the other team. Everyone's stationary, but you're trying to angle and put the right velocity to hit your enemies.
Scorched Earth. I remember that game.
Yeah, those types of games, right? So I'll go with Gunbound. Check it out if you haven't played it.
Awesome. Well, now we hop to the last one I want to chat about, and this one was released in the year 2000. It was a game called Alien Resurrection on the PlayStation 1. Now, it's one of the early dual analog FPS games. One of the first ones that use both the analog joysticks in the same way that we do use it modernly. But what I find interesting was that it was not exactly much of a hit when it first came out. I'd like to quote Stephen Garrett from GameSpot, as to what he thought of these dual analog controls. The game's control setup is its most terrifying element. The left analog stick moves you forward, back, and strafes right and left, while the right analog stick turns you and can be used to look up and down. Too often, you'll turn to face a foe and find out your weapon is aimed at the floor or ceiling, while the alien gleefully hacks away at your midsection, which leaves one wondering how Sony let this get by without requesting a few different control configuration options. So, not exactly the most well-aged take on first-person shooters or the dual analog control first-person setup, but it certainly was one of the first. So, not everybody gets it the first time, but It's the standard now. And so, that has been Vigigame history for you today.
Nice. Well, now we have, as y'all know, the either rotating segment where we review games or the topic of the week. And this week, we're going to have a topic of the week because there's something hot that we want to talk about. This is a segment where we give our opinions on something relevant in gaming. And Mac, this week, we're going to talk about Return to Office a little bit. This is on Rock, Paper, Shotgun, written by Edwin Evans Thurwell. A number of Call of Duty Black Ops 6 quality assurance staff from Eden Prairie, Minnesota, have walked out in protest over Activision's ending of hybrid or remote working, which was announced in December of last year. They're being supported by the Communication Workers of America Union, who claim that Activision are forcing the return to office on staff, quote, with serious medical conditions and doctors' recommendations to work from home. I laugh not because it's funny, but because if true, I have a strong opinion on this. As reported by Eurogamer, Activision Workers Group, a Better APK, have also issued a statement criticizing the unequal ROI policy, which has been in effect for 9 months. The ABK unions say the move has unquestionably harmed disabled employees and employees in need of work from home accommodations. who have been refused exemption from the policy. It also goes on. I got to read this. It says there's also a reference to staff being disrespected by a recent company email discussing the USA's National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which falls in October. The email in question apparently depicted a disabled person working from home, while our coworkers in need are not allowed this essential tool for equal accessibility, according to the ABK statement. I'm just going to stop there. There's a lot we can talk about here, Mac. We can talk about the idea of return to office, but I want to talk more specifically about how it relates to gaming. Some things in life are created on an assembly line. Some things in life are created through collaboration. And then there's things in life where everyone gets their part of the group project and it all comes together at the end. So in terms of games, in terms of you wanting to play games, but also being sensitive to how people who make them want to make them, what do you think is like the most effective way for a project like a video game to come together in terms of collaboration?
Ooh. Well, Mr. Nice Guy,
I ask the tough questions, man.
you always do. And the insightful ones, and the ones designed to bring out the worst in me, as I say, report back to work, let the system break your back. No, in all honesty, I don't know, as there is that much evidence to support that returning to office has improved things that much in many industries. I don't know as there's that much evidence to show that the move to remote work that a lot of industries were able to do in 2020 hampered the ability of even teams to collaborate that much. Now, that being said, I was never a part of any of those teams. I personally have never experienced it. But what I have heard from the literature that has been written was that productivity increased rather than decreased. People wound up having, better outlooks and attitudes. Meetings became, while there were still meetings, there were also plenty of meetings that became emails. And there were plenty of times that were saved. So I just feel like I don't see from a practicality standpoint and from a standpoint of getting the work done in the group project, I don't see where the problem is, but I know why you would want to say no, even to your disabled workers, why you would want to say no for them to keep their remote or hybrid or working from home positions. But, what about you, Nice Guy? What's if true, what are your feelings on this?
My feelings on this is that if this is true that Activision has done this in terms of being disrespectful, that's unacceptable. I mean, that's not for debate. But what I will say in terms of return to office versus hybrid work versus work from home is that it's almost become like the gun debate, or like the birth control debate, where these things are not black and white, but neither side is willing to acknowledge that there are really good arguments on both sides. And this is the analogy that I'll use, Mac. My kids, if I tell them to eat their vegetables, I have a certain amount of authority over my kids. And if they come back to me and they have a really great argument about why they shouldn't have to eat vegetables, I'll listen to it. But at the end of the day, it just doesn't mean they're not going to still eat their vegetables, right? Because I have that authority. And so I feel like this is what's happening with a lot of corporations. There are many, many good arguments for working from home. Corporations are not willing to listen to it. And they'll never tell you, which is what G said in the chat, that, hey, we've signed a 10-year lease and we want the office space to be used. They're going to say, oh, but we want you to collaborate, and, face-to-face is better than, over the phone and whatever. On the other side,
look, I will agree with that point in isolation, that face-to-face is generally better than over the phone or otherwise. And if I could manage it, all of my RPG games, hangouts, LAN parties, we would do all of that in person.
Sure.
Sadly, we're a couple thousand miles away, so I'll take what I can get.
I was going to say, we record a weekly podcast and don't see each other in person. And it's pretty dang successful. So I mean, I guess there's arguments for both sides. So that's the parent-kid analogy. On the other hand, employers, so I just talked about from the employer perspective. Like, employees could give great arguments and the employer won't listen. But at the same time, the employer could say, hey, we've seen that certain people generally work better in person. And the employee could say, well, hey, I'm pretty good at my job. I've been here X number of years. I don't need to be here, right? Why do I have to be here just because so-and-so is not able to do their job? So how does this relate to video games? Because that's what we're talking about. There are plenty of ways to make a video game without everyone being there in person. In fact, I guarantee that there are many games made today where a good portion of the staff is simply not there because they are voice actors and actresses, because they are whatever. They're working remotely. They're overseas, but they got hired for their talent. And it's just the way that it is. So this is not a black and white thing. I would rather play a video game where people aren't all working in the same place. I just feel like being able to independently bring your best in your area of expertise without worrying about all the other noise, literal and figurative noise that comes. I don't need to be a voice actor hearing about what's going on with the financing of the game or the stresses of the level design. I just want to give my best performance, and if I can do that at home, that is great. This differs from role to role, and I just feel like, once again, it's very much the gun debate. No side is willing to acknowledge the truth of the arguments of the other. And so we're always at a kid eating your vegetables situation where the corporation says this is the way it is, and then everyone's angry. It's wild.
Well, another one that I don't hear brought up enough is that, when you are able to take anyone wherever it is they live, you're able to pull from the best talent of every part in the world. I mean, what could be better than being able to access the best talent of everywhere in the world, except for the little spot of America that Mac always seems to live with the world's crappiest internet, in which case he is always unavailable for remote by that nature, and yet somehow we make this work.
Yeah, Galvatron brings up an interesting point in the chat. Employers are allowed to set rules for the workplace. My boss would tell me to find another job if I told him we should all be using MacBooks instead of PCs. And therein lies the problem, which is, don't pretend like you value your employees' feedback if you're going to get that upset when they respectfully come to you with ideas. And that's all I'll say. The last thing I'll say, I remember reading about this comedian who used to write for Chappelle's Show, one of my favorite shows of all time. And someone asked him, what was it like working with Dave? And the comedian was like, it was a lot like me writing skits at home in my apartment and then sending them to him via email. So, once again, this is not a black and white argument. There's so many factors that go into it. And Mac, I'm in my late 30s, man. I'm dang near 40. I've reached the point with this discussion and with others, when I meet someone who is so passionate about it that they are being ridiculous, I just clam up and just know that I am not going to argue with you. If that's how you feel, fine. It doesn't mean that you're right. It may just mean that you have more authority than the other people on the opposite side of you. Let's just keep making good video games. Whether it's remote, whether it's hybrid, whether it's in office, let's keep making these things great. Mac, that has been our topic for the week.
All right, well, now we turn to a crowdfunding project that's trying to get off the ground. We call this Kick or Kickstart. Mr. Nice Guy, I have something for you that it was a delight, but also some sadness for me to see on the crowdfunding site for reasons that will become clear. It is Lone Fungus Melody of Spores, aka Lone Fungus 2. Yes, and that's the reaction because
let's go.
We chatted about this back in episode 307 because Basti put it up earlier this year. Now, for those of you who don't recall, Lone Fungus, the first one, made our top 5 indies from last year. It was Lom's number 1 pick and my number 3 pick, but still both of our top 5s. But back when we recorded episode 307, it was on Kickstarter and it didn't quite make its funding goal back then. But Basti has given it a graphical facelift and put it back on the menu, my friends. So if you didn't get a chance the first time, you now have a chance to get on board. So what we're looking at, in practical terms, it's a $17 minimum buy-in for either a PC or Switch digital copy. And if you're the type of person who likes alpha access, $33 on the Kickstarter will give you an alpha access, a copy of Lone Fungus 2 when it launches, and a copy of Lone Fungus 1, which you can currently buy by itself on Steam for $20. So it's one of those things where it's...
So explain that, because I'm confused. How does that work?
So if you go for that alpha access tier, when the funding closes, you're going to get a copy on Steam of Lone Fungus 1 as well.
And for $33 with...
Yeah, for $33.
Wow.
And since Lone Fungus 1 alone is $20, that's a heck of a deal. So in that tier, essentially $20 for Lone Fungus 1, $13 for Lone Fungus 2. A great deal if you like this. So but let's talk about Lone Fungus 2 and the things that'll be different. Whereas Lone Fungus 1 was a little bit more Hollow Knight, this is going to be a lot more Super Castlevania 4. 4-directional whip action, a little bit more action-adventure traversal, and stuff like that. Now, it is set to be released Q4 of 2025, October of 2025, so 1 year out for the full release. And alpha is probably going to be out somewhere in Q1. Now, that doesn't say it on the Kickstarter, but on the previous Kickstarter, on the first go of this, he was expecting to put out the alpha before the end of the year 2024. So I suspect we're probably looking at a Q1 for alpha if you're, in on that. Anyway, just throwing it out. So, Mr. Nice Guy, I've, had a chance to take a look at it. What do you think, and has any of your opinion changed since episode 307?
No, but I'm trying to remember. Do you remember how much he was asking for the Kickstarter?
It was
earlier this year.
Yeah, the goal was slightly more than, I want to say, is about $32,000 goal, as opposed to the current goal of $23,000 and change. And that one succeeded in getting about $26,000, the first initial one. So whereas this one set a lower goal of $23,000, it's likely, 28 days to go, and it's already about 75% of the way there. It looks like it's on track to make it through this goal and probably, hopefully, exceed the failed one from previous.
Yeah, so nothing has changed. I do notice the graphical difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that he brought this back at a lower goal, because this is something that really needs to be made, and he's proven himself.
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess... I won't mince words here. It's very frustrating that someone could make such a good game.
Yeah.
And not have the second one be supported.
A runaway success. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It is. That's why I said it's kind of sad, because it's like, I'm thrilled we're talking about it again because people need to hear about it, but I'm also just a little bit frustrated and sad that it's like, why are we talking about this again? Why didn't people hop on board? Because this is freaking lightning in a bottle, this man.
Well, it's interesting. Galvatron made a comment, and he was making it in relation to the last thing we discussed. But in the chat, he said, side note, less games should be made. There are a lot of talent. Well, I'm not going to read the negative parts, but he's basically saying there are a lot of people making games who shouldn't be making games. I don't know if I...
Shovelware, we call them.
Yeah, well, yeah, but I don't know if it's based on their talent. I think people are sometimes given a project to work on, and they just have to work on it. But I do think that there is an oversaturation of certain genres and in certain spaces, and I do think the indie genre is one of those spaces. You can put out a 99-cent game on Steam that's just absolutely ridiculous, or you can put out a $3 game like Vampire Survivors that is amazing, and they both get space on Steam.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that probably what Basti is struggling with is that oversaturation. People have so many things pulling their attention so many different ways. Lone Fungus is a masterpiece, in my opinion. So many people didn't play it. but it's a great Metroidvania. And so his second one didn't get the support. I'm glad it's back, and I am happy that this is here.
Same. I do have a note to say about the demo, though. You know me, gotta have a playable demo in a game. And here's where I have sort of mixed feelings, because unless I'm very much mistaken, and I took a look through, I could not find a demo on the Steam page or anything related to this. But the first time around, when we had it back in episode 307, we did have a demo, and it was linked in the, in the Kickstarter, and I played it, and I loved it. So on the one hand, I have tried it. And so, was there a playable demo? Yeah, there kind of was. But I can understand if you haven't and you want to try it first. I am going to say there was a playable demo. I did try it. I absolutely feel like this game should be kickstarted, and I will say kickstart. But I do recognize that that venue of you playing it, trying the demo, is not currently open to you, and I do give my apologies in advance for that.
So couldn't we say that Lone Fungus 1 was the demo?
I mean, you could say it. You could.
Right. The other thing I'll say about this real quick, we talked about rebranding. I believe that when he did this the first time, that he launched it as Lone Fungus 2.
Indeed, whereas this one does have a subtitle now.
Yeah, which once again, this is how you bring something back to life or keep it going rather than abandoning it, is rebranding. Because people might have seen it and said, oh, Lone Fungus 2 again. But this is like, oh, he made some changes, he changed the name, and he's back. So to me, this is fantastic, and I think y'all know what my vote is.
Yeah. So that's a Kickstarter from us. A kickstart on this Kickstarter from us. As you know, we wish the best for every project, but this is one especially that we've seen Basti's work. He does good work. Go for this on Kickstarter if you at all have any interest in some good Castlevania-style action. And that's been Kick or Kickstart.
Kickstart all day. Well, now it's time for our next segment, a little game we like to call Nerd Flex.
Woo-hoo.
A segment where you, the viewers, try to stump the hosts. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you do not. If you're here live, you have a job to do. Let us know in the chat a multiple-choice gaming-related question. Mac and I will use nothing but our noggins to try to answer. No Google, no phoning a friend, none of that. Just our gaming knowledge and logic. And Mac, we also have a test bank for those times when our viewers are being shy or are too busy talking about their Halloween plans in the chat. I'm not being passive aggressive. But Mac, we'll start with a question from that test bank, and we click a randomized button here as we're going through these questions. So here's one that we have not done before, Mac. It's a Sonic the Hedgehog question. Which American comics giant publishes the Sonic the Hedgehog comic?
That would be Archie Comics, I believe. And if I recall properly, they did a crossover with my man, Mega Man.
Really? Dude.
Yeah.
Do you read comics and graphic novels?
I do on occasion, yeah. I've read a few graphic novels that you've shared with me. I seem to recall a fan. I think I.
Oh, yeah.
I still have one of yours.
Yeah, I think I gave it to you. I think I gave you Why the Last Man.
Yeah, you did. That's the one.
Yeah, that was after I took an awesome comics books class in college, and I was like, Mac, you want this? They made a TV show of that comic that was pretty good. 1 season only.
Well, I mean, if you tell your story in one, no need.
I got canceled. But anyway,
dang.
Max says it's Archie Comics. We digress. Let's see if that is the correct answer. He said it with such confidence that I trust him. Flipping the card over. It is indeed Archie Comics. Mac,
Woo!
I gotta know. Wax nostalgic with me for just a moment. Did you read Archie Comics growing up?
No. I
did.
Oh, really? Oh, what were they like?
Yeah, I totally did. You can make fun of them if you want to. I thought they were awesome. In retrospect, they were stupid. But I remember, like, at my mom and dad would used to shop at Safeway in the Seattle area, and like when you're checking out, they had all these comic books at the register, and one of them was like Archie, and it was like $2.50. So sometimes I'd use my allowance, or I'd beg my parents to be like, "Will you buy me one of these comics?" And I'd read them over and over and over again. Yeah, not brilliant literature, but I enjoyed it.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, man.
Well, Mac, let's keep things moving. We have one in the chat. Will you read that?
Absolutely. Galvatron asks, which horror movie icon did not appear in a Mortal Kombat game? Is it Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, the Xenomorph, the Predator, Leatherface, Evil Dead's Ash, or Ghostface? So I've heard of basically all of these except for Ghostface. I assume it's the character from Scream.
Ghostface is a member of the Wu-Tang Clan.
Wu-Tang?
I'm being silly. There is Ghostface Killer really is in the Wu-Tang Clan, but that's not who he's talking about.
Gotcha.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
I would assume that those mainstream ones, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, the Predator, were all in.
Yeah. Now, one of these things is not like the others, and that is Evil Dead's Ash. He's the protagonist, whereas the rest of these, they're all the antagonist. I don't know if that's enough to go off, but, like, I am not a Mortal Kombat aficionado, especially not, past Mortal Kombat 2. So I would just lean and say Ash, just because that's the odd man out here.
Let's go with Ash.
Okay, sweet.
Evil Dead Ash. Not Ash Ketchum. Evil Dead Ash.
Good news for us. It turns out we were correct. It is, in fact, Evil Dead's own Ash who did not appear in a Mortal Kombat game.
Nice.
Thanks
How
for the
many
question,
options
Galvatron.
Were there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
That's not bad.
We got it with 7 options. I love it. Well, Mac, next question. Nintendo question. And this is a red one. It's a tough question. In The Simpsons, interesting. What is the name of the Wii console parody?
Oh, wow. I feel like by the time the Wii showed up, The Simpsons had already gone past its golden age, and so I wasn't paying quite as much attention anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I could tell you about Bone Storm, the Mortal Kombat parody in it, or Lee Travello's putting challenge from that, but if it's not Wii, maybe it's an Us.
I was going to say maybe it's like the P.
Okay. Well,
like it's potty humor,
yeah.
but The Simpsons isn't above that.
Yeah, sure.
Smart show, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was like the P-I-I.
Sure. It's not multiple choice, so I'll go with like a variant on the word us, and you'll go with P-I-I.
All right, flipping over, final answer. Oh, it's the Funtendo Z. Much more complicated.
Yeah, much more complicated, but, apt.
So real quick, Mac, I got to ask you, totally unrelated, Simpsons, South Park, or Family Guy? Which one you going with?
Simpsons.
Simpsons over both of them?
Yep. Especially if we're in that sweet spot of like season 5 to season 11 right in there. That's premium Simpsons right there. I could just listen and watch those episodes on repeat.
There you go. All right, well, that has been Nerdflex.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Same question, but for you, Mr. Nice Guy.
Dude, it's super tough. Because as a kid, South Park was the show that was like, don't watch that show, right? At least in my house. And so there was something like forbidden about it.
Yeah.
Now I feel like it's so, I don't want to say derivative of other stuff, but it's just not what it used to be. Once again, these things go on forever, and sometimes they go on too long.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just for the nostalgia of it being forbidden, I think I'll go with South Park.
Well, now we turn ourselves to a little bit of legalese.
Legalese.
I am not a lawyer. I just play one on this podcast, and I'm also not a lawyer in the EU. But surprisingly, shockingly, and sometimes for better and worse, the law plays a much bigger role, an outsized role, in the way that we play video games. From everything like your recent Steam user agreement and how you now click a button to buy a game and it says you are not in fact purchasing a game. That due to recent California law that we talked about last time. Just wanted to throw that out there. But let's get to what I wanted to chat about more specifically today, a case called Sony v. Daytel. And we talked about this back in episode 260 and again in episode 310 when there was some movement on it. And the general crux of the case is this. A suit was brought against Daytel by a little company nobody's ever heard of, Sony. And this case was brought way back in the early days of the early 2010s. And their claim against Daytel, and more specifically their action replay cheat devices, their claim was that the modification of the data of the video game, even if it was things like randomly generated numbers or, things like that randomly that modifying those randomly generated numbers was in effect an unauthorized and illegal adaptation of the video game and therefore an infringement on their copyright. And when the German court heard this back in 2012, they sided with Sony. And it took all the way until 2021 for the German High Court to go the other way and find against Sony and say, hey, you guys found the wrong way, you misapplied the law. And then a couple of weeks ago, the European Court of Justice, the highest court of the EU, had their most recent ruling just last week. And when we talked about this back in episode 310, the Advocate General had just weighed in on the subject. And I geeked out a little bit about how interesting their way of doing things was, and Lam geeked out a little bit about random number generation. Go back and listen to episode 310 for more. It was a good time.
Right.
But the Court of Justice has finally made its ruling, and I'd like to quote a brief bit. Quote, "The court finds that the content of the variable data transferred by a computer program to the RAM of a computer and used by that program in the running does not fall within the protection specifically conferred by the directive, insofar as that content does not enable such a program to be reproduced or subsequently recreated." End quote. So, essentially, your copyright, what you have protection over when you make a video game, express yourself and fix that in a video game, does not cover the random numbers or even necessarily the variables inside. That's not part of your creation. A lot of those things fall completely outside of the influence of the programmers themselves. And some of these things are completely a result of how many steps have you, the player, taken. That's a LOM-generated number right there, and you, Sony, do not have control over LOM-generated numbers. So be warned, video game makers, entirely ancillary variables in your video game are not considered in the EU to be part of the creation of your game and therefore not part of the work that you have copyright over. And so, today we have a win for sensible intellectual property principles in the EU. The best that the United States could offer this week was a DMCA carve-out for the fixing of McDonald's ice cream machines, and then saying heck no to allowing librarians to offer ROM access, or to allow ROM access for librarians to video games currently out of print. Which, if you remember, is 80% of all video games ever made are not currently available for sale from a developer or publisher. Just FYI, never forget. So anyway, at least someone somewhere is making some reasonable decisions with respect to video games. But that's not the law, especially not here in the US, but it is some legalese.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Matt. I see an awesome question in the chat from one of our listeners. I'm going to answer that once we're done with the pod. Mac, before we go, we have one last segment called What We've Been Watching and What We Have Been Playing, which is exactly that, a segment where we talk about the cool, nerdy stuff we've been into across all platforms. And if you're here live, you have a job to do. Let me know in the chat what you've been watching and playing, because I'm always looking for that stuff to play and that stuff to watch. Mac, what you been watching and playing, my man?
Well, as for watching, the Amazon's now putting out season 3, I suppose it is, of Legend of Vox Machina. So I've been watching that. It's kind of fun to...
That's the Critical Role thing, right?
Exactly, it is. And I believe Amazon has already signed them for a animated adaptation of their second D&D campaign, the Mighty Nine, which should be fun as well. But yeah, so I've been watching that. I've also been watching some cooking videos, and also I found this really niche thing that I find fascinating. There are a couple of people who basically take a fight scene in like a movie, and they will explain it with the mechanics of, say, a gaming system for how this combat like would have happened if you were playing it out at like a D&D table or whatever. More specifically GURPS, because GURPS combat is way more depth to do interesting things. But I've been watching a bunch of movies like that, where it's just like, okay, we're watching this scene from John Wick, and it's just like, here are all the rules or all the maneuvers or tactics or things if you had played this scene out in GURPS. And yeah, so it's very nerdy, but I love it. As for playing, I've been playing a lot of Creeper World 4 lately. It's just my good background game to play. What about you, Mr. Nice Guy? What have you been up to?
You know what? The main thing that I've been doing is, Christmas comes early once a year for people who love Call of Duty. And I'm one of those people. And so Call of Duty Black Ops 6 just came out a couple days ago. And wow, look, someone else in the chat says something nice about it too. So I'm really, really loving it. I'm loving the zombie mode, at least one of the maps, Terminus. I'm loving the multiplayer, and I have yet to dive into the campaign. But, we've all heard the story about how I got into Call of Duty. And once again, quick plug, I did just post a TikTok video about how I got into Call of Duty. New thing that I'm doing. Link is there. If you're on TikTok, please follow. I'll follow back if you're one of our friends. And, yeah. But, Mac, yeah, Call of Duty I've been playing. As far as watching, we're still doing our Marvel watch through. So we just finished we're in the middle of Age of Ultron. But prior to that, we watched Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And we're going to try to fit in at some point the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans. It's my son's first time watching.
Ooh.
And as you know, things will be much, much cooler later on if he's familiar with those two Spider-Men, based on some things that happen in the future. So, yeah, I mean, that's enough for me. I've been playing some indie stuff as well. We're reviewing a couple games right now for Two Nerds, but we'll talk about those in the coming weeks. Mac, what are people into in the chat?
Well, I'm seeing some Deadpool and Wolverine, the Penguin, Onimusha. As for what people are watching, as for playing, I see Castlevania Dominus Collection and a Castlevania Advance Collection. I have played that collection. Good stuff. Blasphemous 2, Star Wars Outlaws Black Ops 6, cited by Galvatron at least as one of the best Call of Duty games in years. Hasn't it been a few years since we had a new Call of Duty game?
Not a new Call of Duty game, but a new Call of Duty Black Ops game. Yeah. So
Gotcha.
The last Black Ops game was 2020, which was Cold War. And I still play that one because I'm a Treyarch fan. So I was very hyped for Black Ops 6.
Gotcha. Let's see. Tower Unite, Zenless Zone Zero, and Genshin Impact I'm seeing in the chat.
Well, Mac, why don't you take us home, my friend?
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for coming out and being a part of the show, for helping us make episode 322 excellent. It's been great to be here, and we hope you had at least as much fun listening as we had making it. Be sure to tune in next time, most Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Central, twitch.tv/2nerdsandapod. That's with the number 2, of course. And be a part of the show. Try to stump us with your trivia questions and tell us what you think. But until we see you next time, remember to be excellent to each other and keep it nerdy. Bye.
Happy Halloween.